Chapter 1. The formula for silencithy said it was an accident. They said the fire took everything. They never expected me to survive. My name used to be Claire Voss. In another life, I wore a white lab coat embroidered with my full name and the crest of Solvax International, one of the world's most powerful pharmaceutical corporations. I held test tubes like glass secrets, coded formulas like poems only I could understand, and I believed, like a fool, that science would protect me from politics. I was 27, young, hungry, too brilliant for my own good, and too naive to realize I was playing with poisons far beyond chemicals. They called me a prodigy. I developed a molecular compound that had the potential to alter the way we treated neurodegenerative diseases. A breakthrough, a miracle? Some whispered. But miracles don't fit nicely into boardroom budgets, especially when curing means killing profits. My supervisor, Dr. Lucien Hart, wasn't just my mentor. He was the first person to truly see me, or so I thought. We worked late nights, drank bitter coffee, and pored over glowing data like priests at an altar. Somewhere in that sterile, flickering world, he made me believe I mattered to the company, to him, to the future of medicine. But then I found the file, hidden in a directory that wasn't supposed to exist. Trial results on human subjects that had never been approved. Side effects buried in footnotes. Children in remote clinics used as test subjects, all under a project code I didn't recognize. Tied to a drug I'd helped design, I confronted Lucien. He didn't flinch, and 3 days later, the fire tore through Lab B2. My name was listed among the presumed dead, but the truth? I had been locked inside that room on purpose. Someone wanted me silent. Someone underestimated how far a chemist could go when they finally understand the true cost of formulas, lies, and betrayal. 3 years have passed, Claire Voss is dead, and I'm just getting started. Chapter 2. The catalyst returns. The first time I stepped back into the city, it didn't feel like home. It felt like the mouth of a machine, metallic, indifferent, and ready to chew me up again. I walked past Solvax Tower in broad daylight. The glass walls shimmered under the late autumn sun, just as they had the day of the fire. I kept my head low, the brim of my gray felt hat shadowing the features of the woman I used to be. And no one noticed. That was the point. Claire Voss had thick, untamed curls and a nervous laugh. She wore sneakers to work and tucked pens behind her ear. The woman, walking past those security cameras today, had a blunt bob, sleek heels, and a surgical calm in her expression. Her name was Elise Marlowe, and she worked for a biomedical consulting firm in Brussels, or so her ID claimed. It had taken me years to build the new identity, layer by layer like polymer chains. Elise had a fabricated academic trail, work history, references that could pass even Interpol. I had to become someone entirely new to get close again, but the science? That never left me. That part of Claire survived the fire, and now it was time to test a different kind of formula, one made not in flasks, but in revenge. My first visit wasn't to the lab. It was to the archives. Solvax's real secrets had always been stored off-site, in a private data warehouse under a different name, Nexum Systems. The place looked like a nondescript server farm outside of town, but I knew better. I'd been there once before Lucien decided to bury me. I used a burner badge, slipped inside. During a late shift change, the air smelled of dust and cold circuitry. Every room buzzed with the white noise of machines holding the truth hostage. And then I found it, Project K, the Kuros protocol, encrypted, redacted, but not beyond my reach. I had written some of the original code myself, thinking it was for a theoretical application in gene therapy. I never knew they'd use it on living children. My hand trembled as I copied the files to a secure drive. This wasn't just about bringing them down anymore. It was about giving the victims their names back. I walked out without a sound. No alarms, no trace, but in the quiet ride back to my apartment, I felt it, that old weight on my chest. Not fear, something colder, like chlorine gas before it stings. They thought I'd disappeared. Now I was in their bloodstream, and I was about to become toxic. Chapter 3. Reactions and residues. Always believed the worst kind of betrayal wasn't loud, it was quiet. It came in the form of silence, of people who looked away when you burned. He was one of them, Jonas Roth, assistant researcher, graduate of MIT, the guy who once brought me Thai food at midnight because I hadn't eaten in 16 hours. He'd sat beside me as I ran trials for Compound 87, his breath shallow, his admiration obvious. He had also signed the official report that stated the fire in Lab B2 was caused by unsecured volatile reagents. My name had been written in the margin of that report. Lab tech found deceased. No foul play suspected. I saw him again 3 days after I pulled the Kuros protocol files. Solvax was hosting a private gala, the kind where champagne floated on silver trays and conversations danced in Latin phrases. Elise Marlowe, international consultant, had received an invitation, courtesy of a forged contact I'd planted 2 months prior. I wore black satin and a scent no one could trace. Jonas was sipping something amber at the edge of the terrace, just past the marble pillars. He looked older, leaner. The cockiness had calcified into something else, guilt maybe, or just expensive apathy. I approached him slowly. Is this where the introverts hide? I said. He turned, and his eyes did that flicker, the kind when something in the brain hesitates. Memory? Recognition? Or just attraction? Apparently, he replied, smiling politely. You're with who again? Elise Marlowe. Geneva Biolabs. A beat. His smile stayed fixed, but his eyes were scanning me now. You look familiar. I get that a lot. I let the silence simmer between us, like a slow chemical boil. Then I looked out over the city skyline, the lights like neurons firing. In a great indifferent brain, you ever think about all the data we leave behind? I said softly. Old files, archived experiments, buried projects that should have never existed. He shifted. It's the nature of science, he said. Some things are meant to be forgotten. I turned toward him, met his gaze fully now. And some residues never wash off. He blinked. Just once. I left him standing there, lips parted, glass trembling slightly in his hand. Let him sweat. The truth was already leaking through the cracks. Tonight, I'd planted a virus into the internal database using a hidden drive inside my clutch. The files would begin duplicating and spreading quietly, mimicking metadata logs, cloaking themselves in familiar naming conventions. By the time Solvax realized what was happening, it would be too late. Revenge wasn't a single act. It was a controlled reaction, timed and precise. And Jonas Roth? He was just the first witness to the fallout. Chapter 4. The half-life of Leasevery compound has a half-life. Even lies, especially lies, they decay in silence, in whispers behind closed doors, in files marked classified until the ink fades and someone like me comes along with gloves and questions. I was in the archives, not the public ones. Not the ones you see on glossy reports with colorful bar charts and diversity headcounts. No, I was deep underground, in the dead zone of Solvax where the air smelled like desiccant packets and forgotten ethics. I wore a badge that said authorized. Vendor system maintenance. No one looked at vendors. They looked through them, especially ones like me, with hair tucked under a gray cap and glasses thick enough to reflect their own indifference. That's where I found it. Project Seraphim. Inactive. Terminated. Buried. The last name on the clearance log? Lucien Harrow. My former supervisor. My lover. My executioner. I froze. It had been 3 years. 3 years of rebuilding my bones from ash, of watching old video footage from the fire on mute, of memorizing the gait of every man in a lab coat. As he walked past me in my mind, and there he was, in black and white, smiling, signing, clearance granted. He hadn't just watched me burn, he'd signed the matchstick. I printed nothing, took nothing. I memorized every document line by line, every timestamp, every coded reference to trial patients who never consented, to chemicals unfit even for rodents. And I walked out the way I came, invisible. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink. Because now the game was no longer about surviving them. It was about breaking them. Not for me, but for every single test subject reduced to a 3-letter coding name and a cause of death, unknown. Lucien had always said, chemistry is about control. Fine. Let's see how he handles losing it. Chapter 5. The catalyst. There is a moment in every chemical reaction when the system becomes unstable, a tipping point, a spark, a breath before the burn. I had waited 3 years for that moment. I chose a Tuesday. Lucien always worked late on Tuesdays. The cleaning staff would already be gone. The surveillance feed on level 9 had a 5-second loop delay. I had helped program it once, in the days when I was a golden girl in a white coat and blind trust. I didn't enter the building. I didn't need to. Instead, I mailed him a file. No return address, no fingerprint, no traceable ink, just one image, a charred ID badge. Mine. with the words, "Some things don't burn as easily as you thought." That was it. No threats, no name, just enough truth to crack the illusion of his perfect cover. By p.m., he had left his office. By 11:04, he was in the basement security room. By 11:06, he had pulled the building logs from the week of the fire, and by midnight, he was shaking. I watched it all from a private terminal in a nearby hotel room, patched into a system that should have been wiped when I died. But Solvax was greedy, not careful. And ghosts like me know where their fingerprints still live. Lucien hadn't aged much, still sleek, still confident, but there was a twitch now in his jaw, a falter in his fingers. He knew, or at least he suspected, and suspicion, I had learned, is the most volatile chemical of all. It corrodes everything: relationships, routines, reputations. Slowly at first, then all at once. He called no one. He went home early the next day, and when he got into his car, the radio played an old symphony I used to hum in the lab. I had programmed the station just for him. The game had begun, not with a bang, but with a whisper from the ashes. When I was still Claire Voss, I believed the worst thing science could do was fail. Now I know better. The worst thing science can do is succeed in the wrong hands. His name was Elijah, 17 now, but the last time I saw his name, he was just 12. Trial subject #30 for -B. He'd been part of the early tests for Neuromax, the compound I created to repair synaptic degradation. It wasn't meant for children, not without trials, not like that. But Solvax had other plans. They needed results, numbers, headlines, and so they went to villages where no cameras roamed. They offered vaccines, food, hope wrapped in white coats, and medical smiles. And when the seizures started, they took him off the books. I found him in a shelter outside Warsaw, under a false name, limp in his left leg, twitch in his fingers, but sharp, watching, and still alive. I didn't tell him who I was. Not yet. "Hi," I said softly, sitting beside him on the cracked concrete bench. "I'm looking for someone who survived something most people wouldn't understand." He didn't look at me, just stared at his palms. "Survival's easy," he said. "It's the remembering that kills you." My throat tightened. I knew that pain. "I want to help," I said. "I think what happened to you was not an accident, and I want to make the people who did it answer for it." He turned then, eyes like tempered steel. "You're from them, aren't you?" "No," I said quietly. "Not anymore." I slipped a file under his hand. Photos, documents, lab records. His own medical charts stamped confidential. Solvax trial 03 for B. He froze, then whispered, "Why are you doing this?" I looked at him, at the broken echo of a boy I never meant to hurt, and said, "Because I was part of it, and I can't live with that anymore." He studied me for a long time, then nodded once. "I'll talk," he said, "but not for free." I blinked. "What do you want?" His lips quirked upward, just slightly. Justice. Chapter 7. The first crack. It started with a whisper, not a scream, not a headline, not a leak to the press, just a whisper, floating through the corridors of Solvax International like the scent of bleach before a bloodstain. "There's been a breach." Lucien Hart, now chief research officer and a board darling, looked up from his digital tablet. His assistant stood frozen in the doorway, cheeks pale, throat visibly tight. "What kind of breach?" he asked sharply. "Digital. A backdoor. Someone accessed level 5 archives just for a few minutes, but they pulled something." Lucien's fingers tightened around his stylus. "What exactly did they pull?" The assistant hesitated. "Trial 03 for B." The blood drained from Lucien's face, not because of the file itself but because he remembered who that trial had once belonged to. Claire, the girl with the eyes like wildfire. The girl who coded formulas faster than she could speak. The girl who had trusted him and who had found the hidden directory just days before her accident. His mind raced. It had been 3 years. She was dead. She had to be dead. And yet, some part of him, an instinct sharper than reason, twisted in his gut. "She's back," he muttered. "Sir?" "Nothing," Lucien said quickly. "Shut everything down, patch the access, and don't tell anyone else." He needed time. Meanwhile, Claire was watching, from across the street, in a borrowed van. Behind a tangle of laptop wires and surveillance gear Elijah had helped set up. The moment Lucien stepped out of the building with that nervous twitch in his jaw, Claire knew. He was scared. Good, because the crack had opened, and she wasn't going to stop until it became a fracture. So why'd the whole rotten foundation of Solvax collapse beneath its own weight? Chapter 8. The Beathy thought they could trap me, but I had already built the maze. I left the file exactly where I knew they would look on an unsecured server in Belarus, just obscure enough to make it feel secret, just exposed enough to look like a slip. It was titled Project Reverie, a fake project, a decoy, designed to imitate the early trial structure of Neuromax but with enough discrepancies to raise questions, not alarms. Within 12 hours, Lucien's team found it. Within 15, they set their own trap. An email ping to the ghost inbox side. Rigged with Elijah. Interested in selling more of that data? Contact us. Anonymous. Secure. Oh, Lucien. Still playing corporate espionage like it's chess. But I've moved on to calculus. I replied. Maybe. But if I go down, I'm not going alone. Let's talk. In person. The bait was set. Now I just needed a body to walk into it. That's where Mara came in, my former lab assistant. Back when I was still Claire. Quiet. Observant. The only person who brought me black coffee without asking. The only person who whispered, the night before I vanished, "You're not safe." She thought I was dead. Until last night, when I appeared. In the shadows of her rooftop in Prague, uninvited but expected, her hands trembled. "You should be a ghost." "I am," I said. "But ghosts remember who tried to save them." Mara listened. Every word, every file, every plan. Then she asked just one thing. "Do I get to watch him fall?" "Yes," I promised. From the front row. And so Mara, quiet, invisible Mara, became my voice inside the machine. She replied to the bait email using a masked identity, posing as a black market broker. Arranged a meet, gave a location. I watched through a drone as Lucien's team moved, surveillance vans, plainclothes agents, listening devices. They were ready to catch a hacker. They didn't know the real theft was happening elsewhere, while they chased shadows in an alley in Zurich. Elijah was deep inside their mainframe in Brussels, downloading everything. Project Lucidity, Project Perseus, Project Graveleaf, the ones I'd only heard rumors of, the ones that weren't even filed under pharmaceuticals, the ones filed under military applications. I felt my breath leave my chest. This was bigger than revenge now. It was war. Chapter 9. The evidence they buried. They didn't just hide their sins, they buried them under layers of bureaucracy, offshore accounts, and dead researchers. But they forgot one thing. I know how to dig. Elijah's download had given us access to a vault of data stored on a cold server, buried within a Solvax-owned shell company called Neurodyne Europe AG. Hidden under budget reports and fake patents were folders labeled in bland, harmless names: Biodev Series C, Nutritional Trials X4, NL Human Subjects Phase 1A. But when I opened them, what I saw felt like a slap to every cell in my body. Video files, dozens, some grainy, time-stamped in the early 2020s, some as recent as 6 months ago. Human trials, not on volunteers, not even on consenting patients. Children, malnourished, shivering, injected with unknown compounds. One boy couldn't be older than 9 collapsed after the 3rd injection. The staff didn't flinch, just wrote in a clipboard. Neuromax was just the surface. The real monster was beneath it. Graveleaf, a synthetic compound designed not to enhance memory or cognition, but to manipulate emotion, anger, fear, submission, originally developed under a military research grant, repurposed for therapeutic uses, tested on orphans from unregistered refugee camps in Eastern Europe. I stared at the screen until I couldn't breathe. This wasn't corporate greed anymore. This was a crime against humanity, and Lucien knew. His signature was on the clearance forms. He didn't just greenlight Graveleaf, he protected it, funded it, rewrote internal protocols so it would never be traceable. I wanted to scream, burn the world down, but I knew better. You don't fight monsters by becoming one. You dismantle them, piece by piece. So I built a new plan, not revenge, exposure. I compiled the files, verified metadata, created mirrored backups on dead drop servers, sent the first encrypted copies to an independent journalist in Berlin, Unhealth Council insider I once met at a science ethics summit, and someone else, someone I never thought I'd contact again. My sister. She was a human rights lawyer now, still hated me for disappearing, but she believed in justice, and if she saw what I had, maybe, just maybe, she'd believe in me again. I attached a note to the files. This isn't about me. It's about the ones who couldn't speak. Make it loud.as. I hit send. I knew what would come next. Solvax would fight back. They would deny, destroy, hunt. But I wasn't hiding anymore. I was coming for them in the light. Chapter 10. The chase begins. Say once you pull the first thread, the whole tapestry unravels. But what they don't tell you is how fast it happens when the thread is soaked in blood. It took less than 24 hours. The journalist in Berlin vanished. Her apartment emptied, laptop gone, a single mug still warm on the windowsill. The uninsider, found dead in his hotel room. Heart failure, the official statement read. But he was 34, ran marathons, and had no history of illness. As for my sister, Mia, she went dark. Her assistant sent a vague message. She had to travel unexpectedly. I knew what that meant. They were cleaning up. Solvax had activated their real machinery, not scientists in white coats, but men in suits who carried guns, lawyers with poison pens, and tech teams that could wipe you off every cloud server you thought was secure. But I wasn't naive anymore. I'd planned for this, and I wasn't alone. Elijah had disappeared into an abandoned data center near the Swiss border, working off the grid. His last message to me: the clock is ticking. You have 3 days before they cut the last line. 3 days. That's all I had to finish what I started. I fled the safe house at AM, taking only a satchel and a burner phone. The city felt quieter than usual, like it was holding its breath. Or maybe it was just me, hyper aware of every shadow that moved, every car that seemed to linger behind mine a little too long. I drove until dawn, crossing into the Czech countryside, to a place only one person knew about: Professor Novak's cabin. He had been my mentor once, the man who taught me how chemistry could change the world, for better or worse. I hadn't spoken to him in years, not since I joined Solvax, but when he opened the door and saw me alive, broken, burning, he didn't hesitate, just said, "Come in, child. You've got fire in your eyes." For 2 days straight we worked, not in a lab, in a makeshift command center, surrounded by maps, encryption tools, old hard drives, and printed evidence because digital wasn't safe anymore. Novak had connections, ex-military, underground activists, exiled scientists. Together, we formed a web to chaotic for Solvax to silence all at once. I sent out the final packet. It was time-stamped, programmed to go public if I didn't check in every 6 hours. The data? It wasn't just scientific. It was damning bank transfers, internal memos, personal recordings of Lucian admitting to using experimental compounds on disposable populations. Once the world saw it, there'd be no covering it up. But Solvax wasn't going to sit and wait. At midnight, the cabin's power died, a drone whirred overhead, and then came the sound I feared most. Boots on gravel. "Claire," Novak whispered, sliding a cold revolver into my palm. "It's time you stop running." I looked at the door. The darkness, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. Chapter 11. The standoff. The air outside was unnaturally still, like the forest was listening. Then a crack, not thunder, not wind, a footstep, another. I held my breath and pressed my back against the wooden beam. The revolver in my hand felt heavier than it should. It wasn't fear, it was resolve. If I had to die, it wouldn't be in hiding. Professor Novak stood on the other side of the room, calmly inserting a cartridge into an old hunting rifle. "Do you know how to shoot?" he asked. "Only in simulations." He smiled grimly. "This is the real kind." The front door creaked. "Claire Dupont," a voice called out. A voice I hadn't heard in years. "Lucian, you're not as dead as I hoped." I stepped into view. Disappointed? He was standing under the moonlight, flanked by 2 armed men in black coats. Behind them, I saw the faint red eye of a surveillance drone blinking above the trees. Lucian looked older, hardened, but still smug. He raised a hand. The men behind him held their fire. "I'm not here to kill you," he said. "Yet." "Then, why come all this way?" "To offer you a deal." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "You want to negotiate? After everything? You've been busy. Berlin, Geneva, the leak. You're not stupid. This ends badly for both of us." I tightened my grip on the gun. "You think this is still about revenge?" He stepped forward slowly. "I think it's about survival. And you're smart enough to know the world won't thank you for exposing the truth. They'll bury it." "Bury you? Maybe," I said quietly, "but at least they'll know. I can give you a lab, Claire. Autonomy, power, Let the world rot, you can build something real with me. There it was, the seduction again, the same voice that once lured me into silence, into compromise, into betrayal. I raised the revolver. This time, I said, I'm not yours to manipulate. A shot rang out, not from me. Lucien stumbled back, blood blooming across his side. One of the guards had turned. I blinked, recognizing the face beneath the helmet. Mia, my sister. She dropped the rifle, breathing hard. I had to make it look real. Hurry, Claire. You've got 2 minutes before the satellite goes black. Novak grabbed my arm. Go. Lucien clutched his side, eyes wide with disbelief. You, traitor. Mia looked at him, voice cold. No, just your prototype who learned too much. We ran, through the woods, through years of pain, through the last shadows of the past. Back at the cabin, the server light blinked green. The auto-release timer counted down. 5, 4, 3. The truth surged out into the world, into every news agency, every public database, every corner of the deep web. It was done. Solvax's secrets were no longer secret, and Claire Dupont, she disappeared again. Chapter 12. The aftermath. The world didn't explode. Not immediately. There were no sirens in the sky, no soldiers breaking down doors, no grand arrests played on loop across television screens. But something did happen. Silence first, then noise, furious noise. News anchors tried to explain the impossible. Scientists scrambled to defend their careers. Protesters flooded biotech summits from Paris to Sao Paulo. Victims' families sued for justice. Politicians fumbled for statements. And Solvax collapsed. Their stock dropped 93% in 3 days. Internal documents, every single one I'd collected, surfaced online. Evidence of illegal drug testing, patient deaths, forged clinical trials, bribes, everything laid bare. Lucien disappeared. I never saw him again. Some said he was arrested. Some claimed he cut a deal. Others believed he vanished into a safe house in South America. It didn't matter. His empire had fallen, but not a single headline mentioned my name. Claire Dupont remained a ghost. I left Europe the same night. No farewell, no monologue, just me, a backpack, and a one-way train out of Geneva. Months passed, seasons changed, and I settled in a place no one would think to look, a quiet village in northern Wales, where the rain speaks more than the people, and the sky never apologizes for being gray. I bought a cottage with what little I had left, small, cracked windows, a leaking roof. Perfect. I opened a lab, not for corporations, not for power, for children, kids who had no laptops, no tutors, no rich parents lobbying for Ivy League dreams. I taught them chemistry, real chemistry, the kind that burns fingers and wakes up minds. We made volcanoes, glowing liquids, bubbles that changed color with breath, and for the first time in years, I laughed. Sometimes at night, I hear the past, a beaker exploding, Lucien's voice, the click of the revolver, my sister's whisper, but it doesn't haunt me. It reminds me that I lived, that I chose truth, even when it burned. I am not a hero. I am not a victim. I am the chemist who knew too much and chose to do something about it. Epilogue. A drop of color. There's a boy in the back of the classroom, quiet, always in gray, eyes that have seen more than they should. He doesn't speak much, doesn't smile either, but today, he stayed behind, while the other kids ran out into the drizzle, screaming about explosions and color-changing potions. He lingered, fingering the edge of the workbench, eyes fixed on a small blue flame flickering in a beaker. I asked if he needed anything. He said nothing at first, then softly, "How did you know you were right, even when everyone said you were wrong?" The question hit me like acid on bare skin. I looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't think of Solvax or Lucien or Geneva. I thought of her, the girl I used to be, locked in a lab, loving a man who loved power more, the girl who refused to die quietly. I knelt beside him, took a dropper of red dye, and squeezed it gently into the clear liquid. He gasped as it turned violet, then deep indigo, then black. Sometimes, I whispered, you don't know for sure. You just trust the reaction. He smiled, just a flicker, but it was real. That's all I needed. We washed the beaker in silence. Outside, the rain kept falling, but inside, something had already begun to grow. Not revenge, not justice, just life.